I released my first commercial game, Starship Danger, which I made in just 9 days, over a month ago now, and had to do all the things I dislike, like filling it with ads and microtransactions in an attempt to recover the cost of my Apple developer's license. So I thought I'd do one of those obligatory videos where I break down how much money the game made and give you some insight into the difficulties of solo game dev. This will also serve as a sort of post-mortem of the game as well. I don't want to string you along for the whole video, so we'll start with the total up front, which is $182 US, or $310 New Zealand dollars, after everyone has taken their cut in percentage of revenues. And by the time this gets to me, the exchange rates will fluctuate, so this is mostly an estimate. This is actually pretty incredible, to be honest. It means I've already made back the annual fee for the Apple developer account. My honest expectation was only making a couple dollars after this first month. To monetize the game, I went with your typical mobile ads model, which plays every 5 gameplay deaths, which I hoped was not as intrusive as other games. I also threw in some video reward ads as another option for the player. I also included the option to remove ads with a single purchase of $2.99 US, which would be a good place to start as we start to break this down. Starting with Android, I made a total of 4 sales. One of them was me when I was testing to make sure things worked. And after taxes and Google and their 30% cut, it ended up being somewhere about $13.50 New Zealand as it's reported, and converted, this would be about $8 American dollars. I'm just kind of calculating that from this page here where it says Google paid me out for the first purchase that I bought myself, and then they owe me like a remaining $10 to come out whenever they pay out next. And over on iOS, I managed to make a significantly more with 22 sales, resulting in about $44 US. You can sort of see on this graph here when the sales started to come in once the downloads of the game picked up. It was getting about 1 or 2 sales per day for the most part, which was just absolutely amazing. And as for the ads, I just simply went with Unity ads for the game, as it was pretty simple to set up after quickly looking up a tutorial. It's mostly what I came across anyway. I didn't really look into any alternatives. So we can see here when the game released around September 12, for the first week it was pretty quiet, made just a few cents or so per day. Then it started to really pick up around the 21st of September, which is when I released the first devlog in the 1.01 patch. So after the game kind of exploded, it was making north of $5 a day, and then really jumped up to the kind of $10 a day numbers around weekends, which I think might be when it had the most downloads per day, but we'll go into the download numbers a bit later. So there was a big spike the first weekend before dropping off slightly, but still generating a steady amount, and then picking up again the next weekend, then eventually kind of just dropping off a cliff into the abyss, making only $1 a day again. But in total so far, the ad revenue is about $130. So without any of the in-app purchases alone, the game is already a success. This also means the majority of its revenue just came from ads. But how many people actually played the game? On Android so far, it's saying there are about 73 downloads, but the mobile app version is saying 88. The Google Play stats are generally pretty confusing and all over the place, and I kind of hate them. But anyway, it shows a couple of acquisitions every day, which is quite nice. But if we scroll down here, we can kind of get a rough idea of where it's being downloaded from, like Brazil and America and Russia and New Zealand being the most popular. At this point, the numbers are kind of too low to analyze, but the good news is it's still getting regular downloads every day, which is just great. So hopefully this just keeps rolling. But I don't think we made $130 ad revenue off 80-something players, so let's check out iOS. 6.9 thousand downloads, which is pretty insane to me. I can't even comprehend that many people even playing my game. My honest expectation was just barely crossing 100 downloads by now. So let's have a look at the numbers in detail. For the first week, it started off pretty slow as expected, about under 10 downloads a day. And suddenly, out of nowhere, it kind of just exploded because I guess more people have iPhones, which also correlates to the same increase in ad revenue that was being generated at the time. And then after the 2-week high, it kind of just came crashing back down again to a few downloads a day. But you can also kind of see here the 3 million impressions, which shows how much the App Store was actually trying to push it onto players, which is great because it generally means that these downloads were pretty organic. And then I guess the App Store kind of just gave up on it and dropped it altogether. But what's weird is when we start to look at the countries the downloads came from, it starts to get really interesting. There's over 2,000 downloads are just from Russia for some reason, and then a lot from Germany and Brazil. But if we start to look at specific regions, there are barely any downloads outside of Europe, with only like 200 downloads around the US, which I think has just started to make me more confused. But anyway, now let's have a look at the leaderboards and active players. So I put 2 leaderboards into the game, which was a really interesting way to track how much players were actually playing the game. First leaderboard was for high scores, and the second was for how much currency that the players have collected. This was more or less a way for players to see and compete at being the richest player in the game, and a reason to keep playing after they've got all the upgrades. It's also a really good way to just track how long people have been playing. On Android, we can see that there are about 28 people on the leaderboards and over 4,000 on iOS. But from what I understand, the large discrepancy between downloads and players on the leaderboards are to do with people choosing not to sign in with Google Play or Apple Play Center, or people just setting their data to be private. But just by analyzing the leaderboards, you can see a lot of people played it for a couple of rounds then gave up, which I feel is probably pretty normal for simple games. However, if we jump to the very top of the leaderboards, we can see plenty of people have probably spent hours playing the game. I think when you get a high score of around the 1,000 mark in the game, it's a pretty good indicator that people have put a fair amount of time, maybe a couple of hours into playing. So the people at the top with absolutely ridiculously high scores of like 50k and 20k are just nuts. With about 7 hours of gameplay myself, I managed to get a 15,000 point high score, which I think was pretty close to the 10-minute mark of how long I survived in a single game, which is also the same point that the game stops speeding up as it progresses. I also have a net worth of 500,000 in those 7 hours, and then there are already 2 people who have cracked 1 million net worth. So by comparison, that's just absolutely incomprehensible for me. And then on top of all that, I was just keeping track of how much people were playing daily too, which I didn't document, but from memory there were about 500 players on the leaderboards at least when it was really popular and active, but now it's down to about 100-ish per day. So let's get into how I promoted the game, or in other words, marketing, but I'm kind of using that term loosely. Other more successful game dev YouTubers will tell you lots of useful advice like advertise your game early before release and don't market to other game developers. But I made this game in a week and you can't really wishlist a mobile game, so let's just ignore all that. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have at this point a very small following, like 3,000 subs on YouTube, 260 followers on Twitter, which is kind of just enough to at least reach a few people in the community. So before I released the game, I started doing my usual posts I make on Twitter, just some gameplay, and kind of gained the normal attention I'd get. I then created a little trailer for release and made a couple of daily posts on Reddit's game dev communities just to get some moderate attention and a couple of nice comments. Then a week after the game released, I dropped the devlog, which absolutely underperformed compared to my roguelike and other recent videos, so I was somewhat disappointed by that, as it was my biggest opportunity to actually reach a larger amount of people. However, the devlog itself is still continuing to leg it out. In other words, just very slowly, still generating a reasonable amount of views every day and hasn't like completely plummeted off a cliff like I've had experience with before. And as much as I resisted and really didn't want to, I tried out YouTube Shorts and TikTok, which I generally do not use at all, which I wouldn't really call an instant success, but the videos kind of just sat around the 100 to 200 view range. But that doesn't matter too much because I can just continue growing on these platforms anyway, since they just seem to be a pretty popular way to advertise your games these days. So altogether, all of these factors for the most part will explain why I'm at least getting a couple of downloads daily, but the thousands of downloads on iOS are kind of still a mystery, which really could just be a case of getting lucky with a combination of a reasonably optimized and well-presented App Store page. Therefore, if you've got a much bigger release that you've been working on for a very long time, you probably want to look into a much better marketing strategy than what I just did. So within the first week of release, I managed to get some feedback thanks to the Shelfman and Hitbox Punisher, who kindly DM'd me on Twitter and gave me some potential changes for the first patch. I then spent a week working on several fixes like changes to the touch input to fix bugs and exploits, invincibility frames, a pause button, some UI adjustments, buffs to certain abilities, a better shop interface in general, and all of the things I'm probably just going to list on the screen right now. As for future updates, I have some ideas, but it's not really viable unless the game continues to grow, with the main one being different ship models you can buy and unlock with different colors, which would be extremely time consuming to create and implement and design, and it really isn't worth it unless enough people are actually playing the game to even use the feature. Then I'd also add achievements and some sort of challenges maybe. So that's kind of all in limbo at the moment unless the game starts to pick right back up again. So overall, the game is a massive success, and I'm completely blown away by how well it performed. I'm also so grateful for everyone who played it, everyone who gave me your hard-earned money too, everyone who kindly messaged me that they enjoyed it, and everyone who left a review. If you haven't played the game yet, give it a try. The links are below. The more players means I'm more likely to release an update. This is my first real profit while doing game dev for nearly 4 years now. $300 might not be enough to quit my day job, but it's a pretty big milestone for me, and it's just a sign of things starting to take off in a good direction, I think, including this channel as well. However, this is the last video I've planned for now, as I'm just juggling 2 major projects at the moment that I'm really trying to finish. One of them which has been in development for 4 years. So I know the majority of people are here because of the Rogulike video. Therefore, my plan is to keep moving forward with that game, which any future updates starting from November will be about the Rogulike game. The next devlog video will definitely be about the game anyways. I'm also trying to stick to like a video per month as well. But if you really want a more real-time update about anything, I'm really active on Twitter almost daily, so please go give me a follow there. And I never usually say this, but in the interest of this channel's continued growth, don't forget to like this video, give me a comment if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't. If you're waiting for more content from me, maybe check out this video here. It's one of my best videos and has like barely any views compared to what I'm doing right now. And I'd really love to give it a little boost because the game in this video is going to be really important once I've finished the current projects that I'm tackling.